Cool. Hey, everybody. I'm
Hello.
from the Writers Guild Foundation. Thank you so much for being here. It's been an intense, crazy few weeks, to say the least. And we're all kind of trying to do the best we can. We know writers are well versed in working from home and staying indoors. So we're going to try to talk to a couple over the next few weeks to kind of hear how they're using this time to be productive or creative or inspired, as well as get some insights and knowledge about the industry. We have two awesome TV writers here with us today. We have Alfredo Barrios Jr. He's a co-executive producer on CBS's Magnum PI. And we have Shireen Razik. She's the supervising producer on NBC's New Amsterdam. They're also two members of the board of directors at the Writers Guild Foundation. We're incredibly lucky to have their support. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Oh. How have you guys been, and what's this experience been like for you for the past few weeks?
Do you want to start, Shireen?
Sure.
I can if you want.
I'll let you go first. You're the senior man here.
How's it been going these last 2 weeks? Probably the same as it's been going for pretty much everybody. Things seem to be incredibly fluid from day to day, and totally plugged into the news. At the same time, I'm trying to be super productive, as much as I can be. Fortunately, I actually had a feature that I had been working on, so I just kind of just started running with that. And then I've also had a couple of developments projects still kind of rolling on with some production companies. But it's a little distracting when you're kind of glued to the news. But I think I'm doing my best to get through it, and obviously it's a little distracting also to be here with my family. I'm married and have two kids, so it's a little crazy around the house. But I think we're doing great, and just trying to take it day by day in every respect. I think on a personal level and also on a professional level, just bite off what I can every day. So that's kind of been my experience.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Shireen?
Well, we oddly wrapped our writer's room, let's see, today's Monday, so 2 weeks ago from tomorrow, just by happenstance. And so that Friday, they decided, oh, well, we're going to wrap production too. So, and in a good reason, obviously, because everybody was worried about safety and health, and one of the places that we were shooting was Kings County Hospital, so of course people didn't really want to be in a hospital shooting at that time. And I don't know how many people know this, but one of our cast members actually did test positive for COVID-19. But we were hoping that, or it seems like that, the exposure to the rest of our cast and crew was hopefully minimal. So we've been kind of on hiatus, and so since last year I didn't really get a break between season 1 and season 2 because we went to India to teach a class. I was like, you know what, I'm going to take 2 weeks off and actually clear my head. And so these 2 weeks have been just kind of just in the house and decompressing, and so it hasn't been that much different than what I was planning on doing anyway for hiatus, or the beginning of hiatus. But I'm sure I'll start going stir crazy in the next couple weeks.
Yeah, I mean, like you guys mentioned, working from home is different than working from home during a pandemic and lockdown for at least us in California. I know, Alfredo, you mentioned when we talked earlier that it reminded you of when you were starting out and you were kind of building your routine. Can you share what was helpful for you during that time when you were working from home and starting out as a writer?
Yeah. This was, basically when I got started, which was 20 years ago when I was voluntarily sheltered in place to aid my own writing. But I think I used to be an attorney once upon a time prior to the writing gig. And I had a very formalized, structured day, right? And one of the best pieces of advice I ever got right after I kind of left that job to start screenwriting, and it was, kind of crazy, but at the time it didn't seem crazy to me. But a really good piece of advice I got was, basically kind of follow the same number of hours that you worked at the law firm to work on your own stuff. Get up at the same time, follow kind of the same routines and rituals to get yourself ready, and then do the same amount of time of work, but only for yourself, right? And so I think for me, what was critical, and that was amazing advice, I thought, was to set like a routine for yourself that you need to stick to, right? So I have a routine that I stick to this day, which is, basically the mornings to me are just completely carved out. I probably, like most writers, I can go like 4 hours, maybe tops, actually writing. And then the rest of it is like, doing research or, maybe, looking at material, but not the actual writing of stuff, right? And so I think what's important for everybody who's working from home is to create a structure for yourself, a time management structure, and stick to it, right? Make it like really, like you can't violate it. And you need, and honestly, I also kind of along with that is to set goals for yourself. So my goal right now is to write 5 pages of this spec feature that I'm writing every day. It doesn't mean they're good. It just means they're on the page. And then obviously from there I can revise once the draft is done. But I think like structure and goals that you stick to no matter what is critical, because I think it's just too easy to come off the track and start to delay things and, say, well, maybe I know I didn't write 5 pages today, but I'll write 10 pages tomorrow, and then before you know it, you've fallen too far behind, and then you get discouraged, and then like you start to procrastinate more, and you're kind of, the snowball starts to roll in the wrong direction, and you want the snowball to roll in the right direction. That would be my advice.
Any advice from you, Shireen, on working from home and how to stay productive or at least motivated?
For me, when I was trying to get into this business, just like Alfredo, I had a previous career. So I was in advertising and living in New York at the time. And so I was working, 8 to 10 hour days regularly. And then I had to basically set, like Alfredo was saying, set goals for myself so that I would work my normal advertising day. Then I would come home and have dinner and then set aside time to write, because I knew that in order to, from during the transition from New York, I knew I was going to have to apply to all the network programs in order to make it in, because I didn't know anybody in the industry. So I had to make sure that I was on task and on deadline to get to the deadlines for those programs, but also keeping pace with always being writing. Because especially at the beginning of your career or my career, anybody's career, reps are going to want to know, what can you write? And hopefully, like, you want to be able to show them, I can write anything, because they want to be able to sell you anywhere. So if you want to be a sci-fi writer, but you're a doctor by trade, play to your strengths and write the doctor spec, and then transition to sci-fi once you have your foot in the door, but play to your strengths as much as you possibly can.
Now, another part of that, of kind of being a writer nowadays, is networking. And like you said, coming to LA for people who don't have connections, or even when you do have connections, how to navigate through and use those connections to get you more meetings, and how would networking look like in this virtual reality, I guess? And and I know writers for the past year, with the agency campaign, have been really, connecting to other writers, online on Twitter and et cetera. So what are your thoughts on how writers can network and connect with other writers right now?
I'll take it first. I mean, if you want. I think the critical thing is probably to stay connected as much as possible to, like, how should I say this? Like, whatever peer group you interact with that does the same thing. So for example, when I first started, I was part of a writers group, right? And that writers group went on to actually, most of us actually went on to become professional writers, right? And so that's kind of like, there's probably, you can think of it as like concentric circles, right? You have your intimate group of writer friends, right? Who in turn also know other people, right? So it's like a circle that can get bigger the more that you keep in touch with the various groups of people, right? So that's kind of as a first cut, I would say, like, maintain those writing group relationships, right? Because each person in turn has other relationships that everybody can leverage within that group. But I think also look for places like this, forums, I would say, hopefully, hopefully this thing doesn't last too long. But if it does, I'm hoping that there are other, virtual mixers, where people can get together. Maybe there'll be more programs where people are connected, kind of more junior writers are connected with more senior writers. I mean, I think this is the time to really stay connected as much as possible and utilize technology, which we have to do that. But as a first cut, I would just say, just really stay connected to your, like, immediate writing group or group of creative friends, and then expand from there. But I will say, just underline, highlight, and bold, the most important thing that you could be doing right now, to be honest, is writing. Networking is fantastic and it's important, but it doesn't really matter if you don't have the material. So I would spend, honestly, more of my time focused on writing material. And that's also where a writer's group can come in handy, in that you get really great feedback from people reading your material, hopefully, and you do the same in turn. But at the end of the day, like, networking is great if you have the material, because it doesn't really matter if you don't.
I would echo that. I call it the 80-20 rule. 80% of getting a job is your material, 20% of it is the networking and the connections that you have. But that 20% outside of COVID-19, that 20% will take up 50% of your time sometimes. But absolutely, you should have, at least, to me, I think if you're going out and looking for a job, you should have, 2 to 3 samples, because a lot of times showrunners will read your first sample and then say, okay, what else? Let me see something else, because they want to make sure that that's not, that your one sample wasn't a fluke. So right now, to echo what Alvaro said, be writing. And then if you had connections before all of this happened and you had set up a coffee or drinks, you can do it virtually. I've been doing a few of those on FaceTime, just to answer questions and that kind of thing. So that kind of networking can help, and hopefully we'll be able to have mixers again sometime soon.
And speaking of samples, as upper levels, what do you look for when you read someone's sample? And how are you finding writers that you would consider for your rooms?
I'll answer that if you want.
Sure, go ahead.
You know, I just saw somebody asked whether people were still writing spec scripts of existing shows, right? Which is a really good question. You know, I feel like when I first started out, which was about 20 years ago, the only thing you wrote were spec scripts of existing shows. So I had like a West Wing and a Sopranos back in the day, and and that has transformed or transitioned, I think, to more original material. I I the you know, on my most recent show that I ran, which was co-show ran with on Six. Um, I don't think we read a single spec script of an existing show. We only read original material. Now, that's not to say that it wouldn't be prudent, probably, to have a spec script of an existing show in your back pocket should you run into that showrunner who is wondering whether you are able to effectively basically take on the voice of an existing show, right? That's always, I think it would be prudent to do that. I would do that if I were at a more junior level. But I do think that the original material is probably more of what most showrunners are looking at these days, would be my sense. But and I don't think you can have too much material. So and honestly, like, this is the kind of craft where you only get better the more you do it. So keep doing it and keep cranking out material, and you know, keep finding your own voice, because at the end of the day, that's what everybody's looking for, is a very distinctive voice that can be added to whatever project people are like hoping to get on, right? As a showrunner, I think that, like, we're always just looking for the ideas that we can't think of, right? So you're looking for original thought and originality. It's funny, just kind of as a side note, I think that the most successful pieces of material that I've ever gone out with, and these have landed me, you know, staff jobs. They've landed me pilot assignments. They've even landed me movie assignments. Are the projects that I pitched to my agents that they didn't want me to do. Because they couldn't understand it, because they couldn't kind of like reduce it to like one sentence, like, it's the West Wing meets the Sopranos meets Lost, you know? And so, and I remember the first time that happened, I was shocked, because I was thinking, well, you guys are like a big agency, like, don't you guys want things that haven't been done, right? And no, they didn't. And so that day I decided to write that script in question. I want to say like 2 months later, just for the hell of it, I emailed it to them. And I said, oh, by the way, that project that you told me not to write, I wrote it, and here's a draft if you want to check it out. Without them telling me, they started sending it out as a sample, and landed me a bunch of shows, interviews. But it was because, like, it wasn't something everybody was reading. And I think people read it and go like, oh my God, this is very unique and interesting. Like, you know, and I think the moral of that story is really, again, fine tune, hone, develop your own voice, believe in yourself, and write to that, and don't let anybody else tell you not to.
I 100% agree with that. There have definitely been times that I've pitched stuff to my agents, they're like, no. And then when I wrote it, it was like one of the most passionate things that I had written. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of people will say when they're reading scripts, is that they can see when your passion shows through. And so write what you're most passionate about, first of all, because a lot of times for me it's sci-fi, but there's also, the reason that I love sci-fi is because it's an allegory for all the shit that's going on in the world. And so there's the script that got me on this show is actually not sci-fi at all. It's about the IRA. And so I think that script's gotten me a lot of meetings, and part of it is because they're like, wow, this brown girl wrote something about the Irish and it's in Belfast Brogue. Okay, that's really weird. But it's not to say that I think right now there's a lot of conversation around authentic storytelling, and you can only write what you are, as opposed to you can write what you know too. I mean, if you do the research and you understand the communities that you're writing about, then, and you're passionate about that, then on 100% write about that. In terms of what material to have, I saw somebody mentioning that some of the fellowships still only take specs, and that is true. And I do know one or two showrunners that for lower level, they're only, well, I shouldn't say they're only, but they do want to see a spec, because at the lower level, they see those writers as their primary job is to mimic the voice of the showrunner, or mimic the voice of the show. But I would say the majority of the showrunners that I know are looking for unique voices and original voices to see what it is that you can bring to the show. Like for shows like ours, like New Amsterdam, most of the stories are going to come from other communities, because we're talking about the patients that are coming in. So a unique voice that can bring ideas that are not about just the characters, not just the main characters, is helpful, because you got to fill 22 episodes every season.
Yeah, can you guys talk about what it's like to write for network television?
You go first.
So network television specifically, as opposed to like cable or streaming?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh boy. Well, that's a loaded question. Look, I mean, I think that like, and I've done both, and I enjoy both. I think that it's different. Honestly, I think it's tonal. I think that network TV is broader in every way, in dramatic ways and in comedic ways. I think it's just a broader audience. So I think that it's like, let's just say what it is. It's slightly less edgy. It's slightly less, esoteric. It's much more accessible. I don't say that to put it down, because I at times enjoy different things. I did a show called Burn Notice, once upon a time on USA Network, which I think could have easily been a network show, to be quite honest. I just so happened to be on cable. But that was probably my favorite staffing experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was a light show that was a little bit more clever than your probably average show, but it would have fit perfectly right into network. And it was light, and it was breezy, and it was blue sky, and it had a certain kind of humorous banter, and it was super fun to write, but I think you do have to think more broadly in terms of story, and more accessibly, and honestly ask yourself, is this something my aunt would like?
Mm-hmm.
And also my 10-year-old nephew, like, because if you kind of hit both of them, you probably have a network show. And the streaming and cable stuff tends to be much more nichey, right? And it's probably much more specific to the network that you're writing for, right? So if you're writing something for AMC, it's going to be much more nichey and different than if it's something that you're writing for, USA, which have a different demographic in terms of its audience, So that's the way I would probably characterize writing for a network show, is just thinking more broadly. And on top of that, in terms of like practically, it's just many more episodes, right? I mean, it's better pay, because there's more episodes, you produce more, and you produce it in a shorter amount of time than you typically do in cable and streaming, which tends to get really strung out. So you do 10 episodes, and over the course of 15 months, by the time everything is said and done, as opposed to Magnum, which we just finished 20 episodes on, we finished in 8 months, 9 months, So it's a big difference in terms of workload and in terms of tone. That's the way I would characterize probably writing for a network show, as opposed to other types of shows.
Yeah, I mean, when I started on New Amsterdam, I was coming from a freeform show, and you would think that they would be kind of similar tonally, but they're really not. I actually had to adjust my brain a lot to what network was, because it's been a while since I'd been on network. And what I realized is that you on network you are protecting the lead characters a lot more, I would say. Um, there's not a lot of conflict among your lead characters, and if there is, then it's usually resolved by the end of that episode. Um, but if there's the majority of the conflict is going to be with guest cast more so than amongst your leads. And it is, I mean, it is a lot sweeter and nicer and popcorny than other stuff on cable. I mean, most of the cable I've done has been TNT, Sci-Fi, and Freeform, which are all kind of similar, but they did have a little bit more of an edge to them and a lot more conflict among the lead characters than the network shows I've worked on.
And considering, the volume of episodes, as well as just the procedural elements, as well as, for New Amsterdam, the medical drama elements, can you guys talk a bit about how each of your writer's room works, of what that process is to churn out that many episodes, as well as producing them?
Well, in terms of, it's interesting because I think that every show has its unique way of doing things. I've worked on network shows where there was no writer's room, because every episode was really self-contained. It was a procedural. It was a show called Law and Order. So it was very, self-contained. There weren't any really serialized storylines. So everybody would kind of go off on their own and kind of break their own stories and pitch them to the showrunner, and you would get approval and be off to writing a script, outlining a script, and writing a script. More recently on Magnum, I didn't showrun it. I thought it was pretty effectively done. I think it was like your more customary writer's room where we got together as a group, to varying times depending on where we were in the season, but typically we would meet probably for a good chunk of time. I would say like 4 or 5 hours a day, and basically break the episode that was in front of us, which is to say try to like structure it and come up with a story, and everybody was contributing and always encouraging the more junior writers to really like pitch as much as possible. I often am asked by junior writers, like, what should I do in the writer's room? And I would my advice is only like pitch as much as you can. Like, and I'm not saying it's a volume business, because like the ideas should be good, but don't be afraid to pitch. Don't be so afraid of pitching something that somebody might reject, including a showrunner, to the point where you just stop pitching, right? You have to be brave, and you have to believe in your ideas. And I always analogize it, and I'm probably dating myself because I don't even know that these like blow up toys exist anymore. But once upon a time when I was a kid, there was a blow up thing that looked like a clown, right? So it would be like 4 foot tall. You would blow it up and you punch it, and then it would like tip over and come back up. You have to be the clown. So you have to be the clown that always like pitches stuff, and then even if you get punched back, like you have to come back with another idea. And I can't tell you how much showrunners love that, because the thing that I think typically most showrunners are looking for are ideas. Again, the ideas that those showrunners themselves cannot think of, because otherwise they would just think of them, right? So it's very important, I think, for writers at all levels, but particularly actually junior level, to pitch as much as possible, be brave, and honestly, just like anything else, it's practice, right? So the more you do it, the better you get at it, right? And I will just add a slight note to that, which is a lot of it is slightly attitude, right? So I've seen 2 kinds of pitches. One is the kind of pitch that starts with the subtext, I know you're going to hate this, but don't pitch like that. That's terrible. I'd rather hear the pitch that starts with the subtext, I think this is a badass idea, and I don't really care if you like it or not, I'm going to pitch it. And chances are they probably like it.
I would say I've been in lots of different kinds of rooms, and but before I go there, I just want to say Law and Order, awesome. We're watching the marathon like nonstop. That's one of the great things about being on lockdown. um, but in terms of the rooms I've been in, they've all been rooms. So we met every day and we broke story together every day. And those are the rooms that I prefer, just because I like the collaborative nature of a writer's room and working together and trying to figure out, because there's always the day where everybody's beating their head against the wall, and it's nice to know that you're not the only one that's doing that. It's just a collective, you're beating your head against the wall. Pitching is one of those things that is, I think everybody has their own style, and some people's style are going to rub you the wrong way, and some people's style are going to be like, I want to be able to pitch like that person. And it's working in a writer's room is a lot of learning to manage how you react to other people, and also and somewhat manage how other people react to you. It's very much a team effort. And, at the end of, you get around to 20 episodes of 22, and by that time you spent so much time in the room with people that you're just like, okay, I need a break from everybody because we're about to tear each other's heads off. But you love them desperately because you love working with them. It's just kind of the nature of being in a room. The thing about the organic nature of any writer's room is learning. To me, it's every room is different, so you have to learn how to read people, because sometimes you'll be in a room where the lower levels, they want the lower levels to pitch. Sometimes you'll be in a room where they don't want to ever hear from the lower levels. They just want you to sit there and learn, or sit there and be silent. But you just kind of have to feel that out and figure it out, and find the upper level in the room that you can talk to and say, I need advice. I need advice on how to navigate. And there's always that upper level. And that's one of the reasons why I'm on New Amsterdam, because my showrunner was that upper level when I was on my very first show. And it's allies. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like it's an us versus them sort of thing. It's not. But the allies are in terms of just knowing who you can talk to about when you're feeling unsure of yourself, because you're not always going to have that personality of, I know my pitch is the most awesome pitch in the world.
What are ways that you've practiced pitching, both either in the room or for your original projects?
I always pitch to non-writers and non-producers. So friends, my wife is great. My kids sometimes are awesome too. And I'll often just take people out for, like, if, back when we could actually have drinks together, I would actually take people out to, like, buy them a beer, and they were just friends. And I wouldn't even tell them what I was doing, but I would be like, because inevitably they'd be like, so what are you up to? And I'd be like, oh, I'm pitching this show. Like, and then I would just actually do, like, I might do like the 5-minute pitch, and then I might do like a 10-minute pitch, and then I might do like the 25-minute pitch, which is actually more or less the pitch, right? With different people. And you can kind of gauge like the reactions. They're like my little mini focus group. And you learn to find out who is like a really good focus group for you, like who asks really good questions, who gives you really good notes, and they're doing it not even knowing what they're doing. Because if you can pitch successfully to like a lay, like a, for lack of a better term, a lay person, right? And get them all excited about it and go like, oh my God, that sounds amazing. Chances are you'll probably get other writers / producers or execs excited about it too. so that's my technique that I feel has worked well. You know, I feel like that's even more useful, to be quite honest, than like pitching it to like the pros, because I almost think sometimes they get a little jaded. But if you pitch it to like your own little focus group that you trust, you often get really good feedback, and they'll ask you like really good questions and poke holes in your project as much as anybody. And you're like, oh my God, I wish I hadn't taken you out for a beer. But actually it makes your pitch better, because like they identified some issue and they're like, oh yeah, you're right. Like, that's a good question. So that's a way I often, and I will say this, and this is, and I think, you know, Shireen made a really good point. I don't mean to like say that one size fits all. I think everybody, and it goes back to like your voice, right? Everybody has to be genuine and authentic. Like you cannot be who you're not, right? So be true to yourself and be true to your personality, even in the writer's room. My only point was, be brave, you know, and however, whatever personality that comes wrapped in, you know, and, but I would say, you know, that one of the things that pitching people in that way does to, at least in my case, is that and maybe this is very unique to me, I don't pitch with notes. I like to pitch in the same way that I just talk to people about my pitch, right? Like my friends and my wife and my kids. And so with enough practice doing that, you actually get better at it, right? So hopefully by the time I roll into like some production office or some studio or network, I will have done it so many times, and kind of practice it in that kind of like slightly more, I guess, informal way, that when I get there, it feels like we literally just started talking about it, as opposed to a very formalized process, which I think is more engaging sometimes with your audience. And so that would be the thing that I think would work for me.
Do you outline your pitches or script it out even, Alfredo?
100%. So even though I will write like typically a 9, and so we're talking about pilot pitches now, right? Mm-hmm. So I will typically write a 9 to 10 page document written kind of like in a more informal, like conversant voice, but getting all of that information out. And then I will do like typically like a 2-page like mini cheat sheet for myself with just bullet points. And then I'll fill them up really neatly and I'll put them in my back pocket. And they're kind of like my insurance policy in case I just completely forget stuff. But my attitude about forgetting stuff is that if I forgot it, it was probably not that important to begin with. It's like telling a story to somebody and you forget to say that, like, you know, I always want, I always say, like, start your pitch with something interesting, like just the way that you would do if telling a story to a friend, right? Oh my God, you'll never believe this. This guy at the office walked in wearing a gorilla suit, right? And then all of a sudden you got people leaning in and you're like, not saying like, oh, by the way, they wore like these Nike Airs that were really, you're like, okay, so who cares? Like, it's interesting detail, but who gives a shit? Like, and so oftentimes when you practice your pitch enough, you boil it down to the most essential part of your story. Because at the end of the day, you're just telling a story, right? Your pitch is a story. It's a story of how you came up with it. It's a story of what the story is. And so that's the fun of it. But that's kind of my process and what I do to prepare.
I want to watch Alfredo pitch.
Next webinar.
My process for pitching, I mean, coming from advertising, you'd think I'd be better at it because I had to present to the client a lot. But anytime I have to public speak, I get incredibly nervous. And so I anticipate that all the words are going to just fly out of my head. And that I'll even forget my name. So I, just like Alfredo, I script out in detail, and then I actually do take pages in with me, and I have certain words bolded on that sheet so that my eye will find, okay, that was one point that I wanted to make. That's one point I wanted to make. But yeah, I want to get to the level that Alfredo is. And when I'm practicing, I'm generally practicing to the cat as opposed to a person, because again, I'm so I'm actually a very shy personality. So if I have an audience when I'm pitching, then I feel really weird about it. Even my sort of husband, I won't practice on him. And he doesn't practice on me either. um, but oddly, for me, if I practice it to myself or to the cat, I'm able to get the conversational style out of it that I want to, and the inflections and the tone that I want to convey when I'm in the room. Um, and it just, I don't know. For me, that's like somewhat acting it, I guess. And I'm not an actor by any stretch of the imagination, but that's as close as I come. That's for me. Going into a pitch is truly acting because that's not generally my personality.
Do you ever use pitch decks, or do you ever come in with additional documents other than the notes that you have for yourself?
uh,
Oh,
yeah.
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Then for me, it's if I'm working with a production company with a pod, they'll create some sort of a deck, like a leave behind sort of thing. But I don't usually create one myself. How about you?
Um, I have really never worked with decks or visual props, um, except for like maybe one or two times where people wanted like possible casting lineup to look at like characters as archetypes. I didn't end up selling it, so like I don't know. I wasn't that successful, I guess, or maybe my pitch just sucked. But um, I'm not one to use them often. I don't think it's a bad idea. I just personally don't use them, but I can envision a time and play a time and day a day when I do that more, because if people kind of want that more as something as a leave behind, or I often work with pod producers who I value and trust their judgment, and if one of them came to me and said, like maybe we should come in with a deck or some visual stuff, I would be open to it. Like I'm not foreclosing it. For me personally, I've never really used them, and I don't know that it's made that big of a difference.
We've
Yeah,
got
I think
oh, sorry, go ahead, Shane.
I was just going to say that the visuals sometimes are very helpful in terms of helping the people that you're pitching to focus on. If you're talking about particular characters, it's like, oh, this person, the archetype for this character is like Emma Watson, or the archetype for this character is Zoe Deschanel or something, Um, but I am a very big proponent of not leaving any written material behind, the whole WGA no writing left behind thing, because we do too much free work as it is.
We have a question in the chat room of Brianne asks, I've seen some writers upload their scripts on their websites. Do you recommend doing this as a way to promote your samples?
I mean, quite honestly, I don't know. I've never ever personally seen or sought out somebody's website to get access to a script. Now, having said that, like the WGA website, I think is very awesome, and I would suggest if you're able to access that. I think you would get a lot of eyeballs from varying levels of people, but including showrunners who are actively looking for people, I think. But most of the material, again, prior to this last year, which was a little bit up, kind of different than most of the years, given the whole agency campaign, have come through reps. And so more recently, probably more managers. I've had stuff submitted, or friends, or also people that aren't necessarily friends, but I have some connection to them, right? And so that is where probably your networking point from earlier comes into play. But again, you have to have the material so that you can take advantage of that networking when it happens, or when the opportunity presents itself, right? So But I haven't sought out stuff on people's personal websites.
I'm always leery of doing that just from a legal standpoint, because you never know who will download it and then try and take your ideas and that sort of thing. And I mean, I think everyone should, for your original stuff, should register their scripts with the WGA, but sometimes I don't know what the legalities are. If you then upload it onto the website, then is it, if somebody steals the idea and it was on the website, then do you have recourse even if you have it registered? I don't know.
And
Afraid of your lawyer.
oh, yeah, exactly. I was like, wait a minute.
Well, I think that's a fair point. I mean, I think that you know, were I still a lawyer, I would say like this was an evolving area of the law, you know, which it is actually, I'm sure. But you know, there's the legality of it, and I totally understand like the concern that your stuff may be appropriated and passed off to somebody else's, or did you waive certain rights, or you know, whatever the case may be. But I think on you know, for example, on the WGA website, like I would probably feel, and I have felt more comfortable, like you know, posting stuff. Just because I think it's you know, it's a little bit more of a formal organization that deals in this business, so I'm less worried about it. Also, I'm sure there's some electronic trail that lets you know who accessed that material, so if there's ever an issue, there's probably some way to track it down. But I have to say, just from my personal experience, having done this for a while, and hopefully I don't ever see an experience like this. I've yet to see a plagiarism experience. That's not to say it doesn't exist or happen, but my personal feeling is that's not a concern that I often share because I haven't seen it that much personally. But I think that there's like, you know, sure, like I think you want to protect yourself legally, and it's always a good idea to, you know, I think don't take this as legal advice, but I think copyright attaches the minute you create it, even without a formal copyright. And it's yours. But you know, we don't have to get into the weeds about the legality. But I just want to say that I think I guess it's a matter of like what you're personally comfortable with, and also like what kind of website are you posting it to, you know.
Tatiana James asks, can a feature script count as a TV sample?
I would say, okay, conventionally, not as much as a TV sample. Having said that, I will say I hired somebody off of a feature sample. It was just that good. But let me just underline, like, it was just that good. I think if you ask somebody to read 100 or 120 page script as opposed to like a 55-page script, you're already putting yourself at a disadvantage. Just be aware of that. But I'll be very candid, like I usually know within the first 5 pages of a script whether I'm gonna like the rest of it. That's just true for me. And if you've got me hooked at 5 pages, I'll read the whole thing. And if you don't, I'll probably read it much more quickly and less closely because you've probably lost me. And so those first 5 pages are critical, at least as it pertains to me. But I would say if you're looking for TV job, write TV samples. And that's just, I think, more prudent.
I would agree with that. I think the one exception that I've seen in terms of samples being read is that there are a lot of showrunners that come from the playwriting world, and so they'll read plays as opposed to TV scripts, or in addition to TV scripts. But features, like Alfredo was saying, it's asking a lot of a showrunner to engage for that long, because they have a stack of scripts to read for staffing, and 120 pages is just a lot to sit with when you have a stack of scripts to read.
And if you're not a member of the WGA, how do you recommend what's the best approach to, I guess, engaging or introducing yourself to an upper level writer, to either online or elsewhere? Like, how do you like being approached with writers that you haven't worked with directly?
I mean, I think that's a tricky question because, and this is, I'm going to piggyback onto the legal idea. This is where I get very careful about unsolicited submissions, because you don't want to be accused of having taken anybody's stuff, right? And so the most prudent thing to do in that instance is not to read any unsubmitted stuff, meaning, sorry, not stuff submitted by like a lawyer or a manager, right? In today's world, or I will add a person who you know and trust, right?
Mhm.
Who can vouch for the person whose sample is being forwarded to you, right? Um, Short of that, like, I would say, keep keep going to, and once we are able to meet in person, like, keep going to stuff like this, because I do think sometimes you will run into, and this has happened to me where I've run into somebody and their story is really interesting and compelling, and I'm open to reading stuff. Like, I'll violate my own rule, and I've never been burned that way, and it's just my gut instinct. Like, I feel like, well, this person is trustworthy, I'm just going to trust them, and then I read samples and we have some kind of relationship, and professional relationship, and it like, have read stuff that way. But I think typically, I think, you're going to want to try to, as much as possible, at least again these days, reach out to managers, maybe even production companies directly. Pods are probably a really good way of getting yourself noticed. Um, on top of that, I will say, for the folks that are interested in directing their own stuff or hooking up with the director to do their own stuff, these days, like, short films are a great way to get noticed. I have to say, like, I really pay attention to them. I love them. I have done them myself. Like, I love working on them. I think they're easy to watch. They're easy to digest, and often give you a really good sense of, like, people's voices, and you see it in action, right? So make sure you hook up with a really good director, and good actors. But I don't think there's one way to get noticed, right? I think that, like, as writers, we're really resourceful and creative and innovative, and I think you have to kind of use that in your own personal way of getting noticed these days. And I think there are a lot of tools um, available to you to do that. But again, I keep coming back to the essential thing: the material is critical, right? And I will be very honest about this. It is very difficult to do this job very well. And I would say that most times when you write a really good piece of material, it will find its way into the open, because just people start to pass it around, and it gets out there, and all of a sudden you've got people calling you about it. So just keep focusing on getting the material really to be really good. That's the first thing, first and foremost.
For me, I don't just like Alfredo. I don't have a set way for people to approach me necessarily, but I'm usually happy when it's not COVID-19 time to do coffee or do drinks, to give advice and answer questions. And it's one of the reasons why I like doing panels as well, because I like sharing stories um, and advice as much as possible. Um, in terms of reading stuff, I am incredibly honest with people that I'm a very slow reader. And when I'm working on a show, it can be months before I get to something. So um, I don't, I don't read
Mm.
material as readily as other people might, but I'm a little bit more available for giving advice. I don't know if that's helpful.
Oh, Sherman, we have a question specifically for you on New Amsterdam. Do you intend to write the medical bureaucracy, in quotes, as if a character?
We kind of do that. We kind of do. We kind of already do that in a way, because our lead character is often battling the bureaucracy, and we have to give in order for it to be a real fight or a real conflict, we have to give that bureaucracy a face. And so there's like one character in particular that's that person, or we'll bring in another character. But that, I mean, Max's mission is fighting healthcare, all the issues with the healthcare system. So essentially, yes.
Is this going to find its way into the show, you think, this entire crisis?
Oh gosh. Well, the funny thing is that we were working on a pandemic episode even before COVID-19 came to America. And so that episode is airing April 7th, or it's the next episode of ours that's airing. I can't remember exactly the date, but the coronavirus is mentioned in the episode, but that's not the pandemic of the episode. We don't even know how we're going to deal with all of this on the show. We haven't circled back yet about it. Everybody's just kind of in shock, and we're still trying to figure out how we're going to deal with our season getting cut short. So
and I guess before we wrap here, you know, what's one thing that the writers tuning in right now, what's one thing that they can do or read to kind of help them with their writing, say today? Any advice or tips?
Yeah. It's probably the books that most people have told everyone to read. I would read Robert McKee's Story. I think Robert McKee's Story is still a really good book to read. It's a little bit more, less practical and a slightly more, I don't want to say academic, but it's theoretical, right? Like it kind of like in the way that somebody might break down story in a classroom. I would read Sid Field's book, still on Screenplay. I think it's called Screenplay. I think it's still a must read. I would read everything William Goldman and David Mamet have written about writing, and Stephen King. I would probably add that too. And then on top of that, I would read, and there are a lot of websites that publish screenplays and scripts. I would read, and I did this when I was starting, every screenplay of every favorite show or movie you've ever seen and understand why it works. Not to copy it, but rather to understand for yourself what makes a successful script or screenplay. And I would say that that's probably the thing that I learned from. It wasn't necessarily a classroom. It was just reading a lot of great scripts and screenplays, and then figuring out what my voice would be within that form. But I think you just have to read a lot of like really great scripts, I think, as a minimum.
I would agree with that. I think for me, I have a tendency in terms of just when I started writing something, I would watch either several episodes of a show or several pilots of a particular genre and just deconstruct it scene by scene, minute by minute. And that's kind of how I really learned structure. Another book that I would recommend is Small Screen, Big Picture by Chad Gervich. That'll it goes into pilots a lot and a lot about the business as well, which I think is really interesting. And then I like it when Alfredo goes first because he mentions most of the important stuff, so I don't have to say as much.
Well, awesome. You guys have been awesome. Thank you so much for taking an hour today to talk to us. And we're recording this so that we can post it for anyone who wasn't able to join us live. And thank you all for your questions. Please continue to tweet us, email us if you have any additional questions or any specific topics or writers that you want us to chat with. So I hope everyone has a great day, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.